Epic of Remnant 2 is nearly here, so let's take a look at some of the new servants it has to offer. Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here, and in today's spotlight we're going to be covering the Empress of Lude, Assassin of the Nightless City. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers on how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. Now, onto Assassin's stats. Assassin has a max HP of 10,942 and a max attack of 8,981, which becomes 8,082 when accounting for her class modifier. Compared to her fellow 4-star assassins, her HP is quite low, not even breaking the 11,000 mark like most assassins do, while her attack is just slightly above the average. Comparing her to the other 4-stars on the whole, her HP still ranks low, as does her attack, both very below average. Overall, her stats aren't particularly focused in either HP or attack, making her more balanced, but very weak in both regards. Taking a look at her skills, her first skill is Torture Technique rank A. It decreases an enemy's defense for 3 turns between 10 and 20% depending on level. Her second skill is Imperial Privilege rank B. It has a 60% chance of increasing her attack between 18 and 38%, a 60% chance of increasing her defense between 18 and 38%, and it restores between 800 and 2800 HP, all depending on level. And finally, her last skill is Empress Charisma rank A. It increases the attack of all allies for 3 turns between 10 and 20%, and it increases the quick card effectiveness of all allies except herself for 3 turns between 10 and 20%, both depending on level. Moving on to her passives, she has Present Concealment rank D, which increases her crit star drop rate by 4%. As for her deck and Noble Phantasm, Assassin has a Quick Buster deck with Quick Arts Buster, and a Quick Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Gao Mi Lao Ji Jing. It deals significant damage to a single enemy with between a 1200% and 2000% damage modifier, depending on level. It also inflicts poison for 3 turns, dealing 1000 damage per turn, and increases her own crit strength for 3 turns between 50 and 100%, depending on overcharge. This is improved through a strengthening quest, which will increase the damage modifier to between 1600% and 2400% depending on level, and will also add the effect of removing all buffs from the enemy. Finally, let's take a closer look at her cards. Her Quick card hits 3 times, her Arts card hits 3 times, her Buster card hits 3 times, and her Extra attack hits 3 times. She has an NP gain rate of 0.87% and a star rate of 25.5%. This is good NP gain from the Arts and Quick cards, but below average star generating for her class due to the double Buster, weak passive, and only 3 hit Quick cards. Nightless Assassin comes onto the scene as our first dedicated Quick support servant. While Atlanta and Skahawk have performed this role best up until now, the former has always been a bit clunky to use in most crit teams, while the latter likes to be more selfish with her buffs. Nightless Assassin, on the other hand, is a servant that excels both in support and in offense. Her stats are very weak at first glance, not even being noteworthy within the relatively weak 4-star assassin class, but as always, stats rarely tell the whole story. What makes Assassin the indomitable servant that she is are her skills. Torture Technique is as straightforward a skill as it gets, just a 20% defense debuff on a single enemy. But while bland, it is nevertheless still a very effective skill, especially when used against bosses or in conjunction with her other skills, namely Empress of Charisma. Assassin's Charisma is a hybrid attack buff and quick buff. It is a potent skill that not only raises the party's overall damage by 20%, but quick allies will see a significant double buff, allowing their quick cards to do upwards of 40% more damage and generate more stars. Unfortunately, the quick buff doesn't target Assassin herself, so she only benefits from half of the skill. The skill is only on a 5-turn cooldown, so you can keep it active for most of the battle too. Finally, Assassin makes up for the lack of self-buffing on her Charisma with Imperial Privilege. Imperial Privilege is one of the best self-buffs in the game, providing incredible defense, attack, and healing, all on a very short cooldown. The only downside is the low chance of activating the attack and defense buffs, making it incredibly RNG dependent without the right kind of support. If you're using her as more of a traditional support for your quick team, which I recommend, then prioritize Empress Charisma first for the massive buffs on the low cooldown, followed by Torture Technique for more team damage, and then Imperial Privilege last, since it isn't really a support skill. If you want to use more offensively, then you should go for Imperial Privilege first for the huge self buff to maximize your damage, followed by Empress Charisma, and then Torture Techniques last. Assassin's Noble Phantasm is a single target, high damage nuke that can poison enemies and grants her a significant crit damage buff. This Noble Phantasm is upgraded through a strengthening quest that is about 2 years away that further increases the damage and also adds the effect of removing the enemy's buffs. This Noble Phantasm is very strong, even pre-strengthening quests, but post-strengthening quests it becomes ridiculous. For those of you who have seen my video on her recent buff, I mentioned that she isn't on Carmilla or Jack's level yet, and I may have to eat a bit of crow on that because she absolutely is when it comes to pure NP damage. To give you an idea of how strong Assassin's Noble Phantasm is, she actually outdamages every other assassin in the game at NP1, even the 5 stars like King Hassan, so long as you don't factor in any special buffs like anti-female or anti-alter ego. On top of that damage, Assassin also receives a big crit damage buff, and she removes the enemy's buffs, making this the perfect blend of high level utility and damage. And that sums up Nightless Assassin as a whole, an incredibly strong blend of team utility and solo damage. She can bolster quick team damage significantly thanks to Torture Techniques and Empress Charisma, effectively giving your quick team more than 60% bonus damage against any target, while also being able to remove buffs from any enemy post-strengthening quest, making her an invaluable asset for any boss fight or challenge quest. And even if you do lack a quick team, Nightless Assassin on her own is capable of putting out world-class damage, surpassing the 5-star assassins. Her Noble Phantasm gain isn't lacking either, so she can Noble Phantasm multiple times in the right teams, allowing her to make extra good use of that bonus crit damage and buff removal. All this allows Assassin great flexibility, especially for an Assassin Servant who are generally regulated to niche teams. She can be a top tier damage dealer to build around, or a top tier support to make any quick team work. Or she can even be the focal point of a crit team. But while Nightless Assassin can wear many hats, she does have some critical faults. Firstly, her star generating is lackluster unless you have quick change with your Noble Phantasm, making it difficult for her to support crit teams or make use of her own crit buff. However, the more significant demerit to Assassin is her over-reliance on Imperial Privilege for both sustain and damage. While I mentioned she can top even 5 stars with her NP damage, all that depends on whether you get the attack buff from Imperial Privilege. Without it, her damage is cut. Likewise, without the defense buff, she's left vulnerable with her low HP pool and no hard defense, a ripe target to be picked off by an enemy crit or Noble Phantasm, so failure to land the Imperial Privilege can make her very vulnerable and soft. But even without Imperial Privilege, she can hold together a quick team exceptionally well, which is why you should look toward building one around her. I suggest using Nightless Assassin to support quick servants with high damage single target Noble Phantasms like Agartha, Ushi, or Melt. Agartha lacks high uptime damage buffs, so Nightless Assassin can supplement Agartha's damage on non-Noble Phantasm turns to make her more of a consistent attacker. Ushi benefits greatly from the extra damage buffs and can bolster Assassin's NP gain so that you can get more NPs off in longer fights. And Melt can fight alongside Assassin against Riders. Of course, you can also use Assassin herself as your main damage dealer, in which case I suggest pairing her with supports who can keep her alive, provide crit stars, or make her more consistent. Servants like Ozymandias, Jean, and Fuma fit these roles well. Ozzy's protection of the Sun God can guarantee the success of Imperial Privilege, eliminating Assassin's biggest weakness. Jean has a star generating skill, and she has the best form of protection available for fragile servants. And Fuma is a fellow quick servant who can produce all the stars that Nightless Assassin needs, and a form of hard defense with his targetable evade. Nightless Assassin's Bondcraft Essence is Palace of Lao Yang. It increases team quick card effectiveness by 20%, but decreases defense by 10% while she's on the field. Normally, I'm not a fan of Bondcraft Essences with defense down demerits, especially on fragile servants like Assassin, but due to her role as a quick support, this can be a fantastic craft essence for short battles where the defense down doesn't matter as much. Other than that, if you're building her as a support, then I recommend using 2030, Dangerous Beast, or Kitchen Patissiere. 2030 and Dangerous Beast are great for improving your star generating, while Kitchen Patissiere also helps you with generating NP so you can get your Noble Phantasm off quicker. Speaking of which, for offensive teams, you should build around maximizing your Noble Phantasm damage. To that extent, Black Grail, Imaginary Around, and Someday in Summer are all perfect. Here's Your Honor is a fantastic choice as well if you're doing a more crit-oriented team. And finally, for some future proofing, I do suggest Seaside Luxury when using her as a support because it's going to greatly increase your star generating. Overall, Nightless Assassin is a strong and versatile servant. She fills the position of quick support better than anyone else in the game at the moment. Her very low cooldowns ensure that she has high uptime on all of her skills. She has great utility with her buff removal, and she's more than capable of being the main attacker, as well as possessing one of the strongest Noble Phantasms of any servant in her class. Her only real faults are her over-reliance on Imperial Privilege for damage and survival, and a lack of star generating for proccing her own crit buffs. All in all, she gets an A- from me pre-strengthening quest, which jumps up to an A post-strengthening quest. The huge damage spike and buff removal utility from her strengthening quest really improve on her overall ability, but even without that, she is absolutely a top-tier assassin who is worth building a team around or elevating your quick team to the next level. And those are my thoughts on Nightless Assassin. If you're lacking a strong assassin or plan on using quick teams, then I really think it's essential to go for her while she's on rate up. If you plan on rolling for her, then let me know in the comments below, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over at our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.